Hi and welcome back to Richo. Tonight we've got from the opposition the acting Shadow Finance Minister, Matthias Cormann. And I know that Andrew Robb's back on deck tomorrow. He's had a bit of a family problem, but it's being sorted and all is well. Matthias, thank you for coming in. Now tell me what... I've listened to Tony Abbott and I've listened to Joe Hockey over the last 24 hours. And it astounds me, frankly, that they can't find anything worthwhile in the budget, because there are some very good measures in it. I don't understand how you can just bag the lot. The job of an opposition, I know, is to oppose, but also you've got to be a bit constructive. So what I'd like you to do for me is outline, if these cuts aren't good enough, where would yours be?
Well, Graham, I mean, Penny Wong had it right earlier in the week, so there's something positive for you, because Penny Wong said it would be a typical Labor budget. And, of course, it is a typical Labor budget with more waste, more taxes, more deficits, more debt, and it's all peppered with a bit of class warfare in the middle of it.
OK, well, there's the politics, but just tell me, where would you make the cuts that you think are necessary?
Well, I mean, let's just remind ourselves here that this, Wine Swan has been blessed with the best terms of trade in 140 years, and they still can't get a surplus going. This budget should be in a much stronger position, and of course it should be in surplus. Now, where should the cuts be, Graham? I mean, you know that in the lead up to the last election we presented $50 billion worth of cuts. The government did pick up some of those cuts we suggested in last night's budget. In fact, in the lead up to the last election, we suggested that the Trades Training Centre program and the Productivity Places program wasn't hitting the mark, it wasn't value for money, and that we were going to cut funding to those particular programs.
If that's small, big, tell me about the big stuff. If you won't get into any form of middle class welfare, what will you get into? That's what I'm asking.
Well, I mean, you talk about middle-class welfare. We talk about tax breaks for families. And, I mean, like, I just take one example, and I know that you were the health minister back in the Keating government days in 1993, after 10 years of Labor government then, when private health insurance membership was in free fall, and when the pressure on public hospitals was increasing, and when private health insurance premiums was going up, and you were trying to fix it through things like a Medicare levy surcharge and things like that nature. And you know, of course, that the Howard government introduced a series of measures to fix the problems in private health, and of course this government, by means testing private health insurance, wants to abolish private health insurance rebates for millions of Australians, and that is of course not in the national interest, because it will yet again push up the cost of premiums. It will see many people leave private health, and it will put additional pressure on public hospitals.
Yes, please. I mean, I understand the politics of all this, and I understand that you've got your job to do, but so have I. And I mean, if we're just going to play politics, I mean, I introduced a dental scheme, the first one, and as soon as it was introduced, Peter Costello got in the government and abolished it. So we can all go in those tit-for-tat things, but the important thing that for people listening is to know how serious you are about cuts and where you'd go.
Well,
you've got to give us an indication. You can't, and really you're avoiding it. So just tell me, where would you cut?
Graham, we are very serious about bringing the budget back into surplus and start to repay Labor Party debt. I mean, Tony Abbott tomorrow will make a comprehensive statement in the Parliament. He will make his budget reply, and it will be a very positive statement, putting forward a positive plan for Australia, with at its centrepiece restoring a good government for Australia. So there will be a very comprehensive statement tomorrow. You know that we've put a very comprehensive list of savings forward in the lead up to the last election. And of course, in the lead up to the next election, depending on when that's going to be, we'll do the same.
I also remember there was a massive hole in your figures, which Treasury and I think even your own party had to admit in the end, a massive hole in those figures. So I don't know which part of it was fair income and which wasn't.
Well, the government was so critical of our spending cut proposals that they've started to adopt some of them. We just wish that they would adopt the whole list of them. But, Graham, there's just one thing I want to raise, though. Wine Swan and Penny Wong yesterday were too embarrassed to mention the debt figure. The debt figure the government net debt is going to go up to $107 billion, which is a staggering increase compared to last year. But the latest thing that's actually emerged is that the government, as I'm led to believe, the government is at risk of running out of money by the end of this financial year. Because you might remember that 2 years ago, the government got approval from the Parliament to more than double the debt ceiling from $75 billion to $200 billion. Now, in the budget papers is there's a little figure buried in the budget papers that the value of government securities, Commonwealth securities, is expected to rise to $200.6 billion by 30 June. Now, the government hasn't got approval to take out more than $200 billion worth of debt, so there's a real question mark here as to what the government is going to do about this. And of course, we know that after Wayne Swan introduced the budget last night, after he sat down from reading out his budget speech, Bill Shorten, who'd just been here, went into the Parliament and introduced legislation to increase the debt ceiling by another $50 billion, because clearly the government is worried that they're going to run out of money.
Yeah, but you'd have to say about the debt question in general. If you look around the world, look at the OECD, which I suppose is the only part of the world you have to look at. We're doing pretty well by the standards of most of them. We're way in front.
The reason,
have a look at net debt in America. I mean, we're way in front.
Yeah, Graham, the reason it isn't worse, the reason it's not worse is because John Howard and Peter Costello did such a great job and left this government with no government net debt when they lost the election in 2007. This government had the best starting position of any government anywhere in the Western world when they got into government in 2007.
Actually, I can see that. I don't think there's any doubt about it. Costello and Howard, in my view, did a pretty good job on all that. But, of course, there was a financial crisis. There was a global crisis. We can't pretend it didn't happen, can we?
But Richo, there's always issues to deal with in the economy. We had the Asian economic crisis, we had floods, we had cyclones.
We had nothing like that global financial crisis. That was the worst in 80 years. You can't compare it to a flood. It's so much worse.
No, look, I mean, there's always challenges in the economy, and of course, yes, the global financial crisis was a significant challenge. However, the government, there was way too much waste and mismanagement, there was way too much incompetence, and we're now in a situation where the Keating record net debt position of $96 billion is, of course, now going to be bypassed by Wayne Swan, who's taking us to $107 billion worth of net debt. And there, in the night of day, Bill Shorten last night was introducing legislation to increase the debt ceiling by another $50 billion after less than 2 years ago. They more than doubled it.
Well, as I said, if you look around the world, our net debt position, net government debt, public debt, is much better than almost any country in the OECD. So
we're not tracking very well. We're not tracking very well.
Well, we're getting back into surplus next year. So if we're getting back into surplus next year, we can start to track a lot better, can't we?
Well, let's talk about that, because the budget position this year has deteriorated by another $8 billion over the last 6 months. So we're going to have a deficit of $50 billion this year. Next year, it's going to deteriorate by another $10 billion to take us to a deficit position of $22.6 billion. But the government wants us to believe that the year after that, not only is the position not going to deteriorate at all, it's actually going to improve significantly. That is just unbelievable. And that, of course, is the year when the carbon tax is supposed to come in. The carbon tax, where there's no detail in the budget about it at all. So we already know that
when John Howard introduced the GST, did he put it in the budget before it? And I think the answer you'll find is no. So it's hardly not there's a precedent for this, isn't there?
You know what, Richo? The answer is yes. I know that the Labor government has been spinning this with the gallery for the last week. But I actually had a good conversation with Peter. Well, I had a good conversation with Peter Costello about this earlier in the week. The Howard government announced the GST in August 1998. We went to an election in October 1998, and incidentally, we took the GST to an election
I know that.
before
that
passing through the Parliament. And the point is that the GST was fully included in the subsequent budget, which was, of course, in May 1999. So somehow this suggestion that we didn't include the GST after we announced that we would like to introduce the GST took it to an election. Of course we did. We followed absolute proper process, and if this government was going to do the right thing, they would take their carbon tax proposal, which is going to push up the cost of everything, which is going to cost jobs without doing anything to reduce emissions. They would take it to an election.
Matthias, we'll have the debate on the carbon tax. Fear not. It'll be on in earnest, and it'll be on very soon. But we have to leave it there. I want to thank you very much for coming along.
Good to be here.
Good. Thanks, Matthias. We'll be back in just a moment with Sol Eslake.